So what's going on guys, Kate's here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I will show you the top 3 new best solo player builds in Albion Online. So for each and every single build I will show you what abilities and armor you want to get. Then I will explain every single skill and what is the best skill rotation that you want to use for both PvP and PvE. And then lastly I will show you the best gameplay, so you would be able to get the best results and highest damage possible and much more. So no matter how much silver you have or how high or low your weapon levels are, you can easily use these builds and follow the step-by-step guide. So if this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we are going to use the Hell Spawn Staff. Overall this build has very high damage, and because this is the new shapeshifting weapon, we will get 3 more additional skills and 1 extra passive. So if you want to use the best new shapeshifting build, then here you go. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we want to get the Hell Spawn Staff. So for your Q you pick the 4th option, then for your W you pick the 1st option, and then lastly for your passive you go with the Intimidating Presence, which is the 2nd option. Then for the helmet you want to get the Call of Purity and pick the 3rd ability and 1st passive. Then for chest armor go with the Stalker's Jacket and pick the 3rd ability and 1st passive. Then for boots go with the Guardian Boots and choose the 2nd ability and 2nd passive. Then for your cape you pick the Avalonian Cape, and then lastly for your consumables you want to go with the Poison Potions and Dead Water Eels too. But then for alternatives, specifically for 1v1 fights and fame farming, I would recommend for the Guardian Boots to go with the 3rd ability, because this will give us the Giant skill, which will double our health by 100% for 8 seconds. So if you need more defensives and you don't need the run skill, then I would recommend to pick this instead. And then lastly, if you want to try out the new Brazilian Cape, then you can switch it with the Avalonian Cape. Both capes are good, but the Avalonian is the best damage cape, and the Brazilian Cape is the best for defense. So choose whichever you prefer. I personally want the highest damage, so I went with the Avalonian, but if you can afford it, then for now you can use the normal Tetford Cape as well. Both are the same, the Avalonian will just do twice as more damage. As I've said in other videos, the best builds are versatile, so you can get 100% performance no matter in what type of event you're participating. So that's why having multiple options is the way to go. Okay, so now let's go over to the gameplay, where I will show you the best way to play this build. So for the first Q spell we have the Pulse Shock. This skill will cast the Shadow Shockwave in front of you, which will deal damage, decrease the enemy's resistance and build up your stacks. Then the 2nd W skill will place the Circle Shadow, which in 4 meter range will deal damage every 0.7 seconds, and additionally will slow the enemy for 20%. And on top of all of this, each hit that the enemy takes in the circle will apply 1 more stack to your character. And then for our E skill we have the Hellfire Imp Transformation, which is very fun and overpowered skill. So first things first, when you press the E skill, you will transform into a Hellfire Bat. This transformation will increase your damage and energy regen, but will decrease your armor. So if we open up our character info, and you can see that right now in the human form, we have 4039 health, and our physical and magic damage both are on 28%. Well, now when we transform, you can see that now our physical damage is 50%, and our health has dropped to 3333, and our armor has also dropped to 66. So basically this transformation will make us very strong, but just a little bit weaker, and as soon as we change back, we will gain back our old stats. So with that said, anytime we want to deal massive damage, we just press the E and transform into the bat, and then from here we will get 2 new skills. The Q is our main damage dealer, which will shoot a fire orb that will deal damage through all enemies that it goes through, and if you have at least 1 stack applied on you, then the orb will explode and do even more damage, plus teleport you to their location. And then second of all we have the W skill, which will channel this fire that shoots the fireballs every 0.2 seconds. The small damage and having to channel it is not great for PvP, so I would recommend to only use the skill for fame farming. And then lastly, the second part of the skill is that if we drop to 0% health while in the bat form, then instead of dying we will get immunity from stunts and damage, and depending on how many stacks we had, we will get from 5 to 30% health back. So as you can tell, this weapon is amazing for fame farming and general PvP. Basically, we can build up to full stacks from 2 Qs and 1 W, and then we can keep resetting the stacks timer by just using the basic Q skill on the enemy, and then when we get to low HP, we can just transform into the bat, and then when the enemy thinks that we have just died, but instead we get revived with 30% health back, and then we can just finish off the enemy. So if you are tired of getting quickly killed when fame farming, or you just can't escape that one-shot build in PvP, then this build is your new answer, because now you can outplay the enemy and get a second life with 1/3 of your HP back. So then with that said, now let's move over to the next skill, which is the electric field. And when you activate it, we will get this big red electric field that will last for 7.5 seconds and deal massive AoE damage every 0.5 seconds. Then for the helmet we have the Avalonian beam. This skill will shoot a massive energy for 22 meters that will do insane amount of damage and interrupt any enemy spell casting. So this skill is great for both PvP and PvE. And then finally we have the F skill, which is just a simple speed boost that will give us 80% speed and health regen for 8 seconds. Then for our consumables we have the poison potions for extra damage and the dead water eel stew for increased damage and cooldown buffs. And then finally we have the Avalonian cape, which when we use auto attack on the enemy, it will do big damage in 6-meter range, while reducing the enemy's damage by 15%. So this is basically the same thing as the Tetfar cape, just with more damage and the debuff on the enemy. So with all of this said, now let's move over to the rotation. And PvE and PvP basically work the same way. So then at the beginning of the fight we want to use our Q skill, then 1 W skill, and then again we use once the Q skill. And by this time you should have bunch of stacks, which you can now see on the top left corner or under your character HP bar. So then from here we want to just transform into the bat by pressing the E skill, and then from here we can just use auto attacks plus the Q skill. Then when our bat form runs out, then we can use the R and D skills. And then from here again we can just keep using the Q and W, and then transform again into the bat and keep using the new Q and auto attacks. And then lastly, if your health ever drops low, then switch back to the bat form, and when your HP drops to 0, you will get revived and get from 5 to 30% HP back. So now let's see what we did in this rotation. But first, while using the Q twice and W once, we will do a bunch of damage and get from 3 to 5 stacks, depending on how many enemies we hit. So then from here we can just transform into the bat, so we could do insane damage by using auto attacks, which will activate the cape plus do twice as more damage. And then we can use Q for even more AoE damage. Then when our bat form runs out, then now we can use the R and D for even more damage. And then we can just keep using this rotation, but then when we are about to die, then we switch back to the bat form to not die but get revived automatically. As you can see, this build is very simple, and to be honest, you can use skills in whatever order you like, as long as you always have at least 1 or 2 stacks when entering the bat form, so your damage would be increased, as well as you want few stacks when you're about to die in the bat form, so you would get that 30% back instead of 5 or 10. But remember that this build has insane damage, and all skills will do DPS. Just with those few stacks, you will do even more of it. This build is very fun, and right now from all the new shapeshifting weapons, this is the best overall setup. So I recommend for you to try this one out, as it is amazing for 1v1s and fame farming. And on top of all of this, you can even change for the Stalker's Jacket to the Defense Inferno skill and get even more defensives. But especially for PvP, don't be afraid to just keep using all of your skills and try to burst the enemy down, because we have that revival with 30% HP back. And in PvE, this should be very easy and simple, and that's about it. So then moving over to the quick build overview, and for the weapon we are going to use the Frost Staff. I personally have been playing this weapon for years now, and it is my most favorite one, because of its playstyle, the ability to be a real mage with very good mobility, and because of course we will be doing huge amount of damage. And then as well, like all of my builds, this setup is amazing for both PvP and PvE. And then finally, you can use this setup starting with tier 4 equipment and pretty low levels in the Destiny board. So no matter what type of player you are, this build is definitely for you. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we are going to go with the Frost Staff. So for your Q you pick the second option, then for your W you pick the third option, and then lastly for your passive you go with the Aggressive Caster, which is the third option. And then for the offhand we pick the Tome of Spells. Then for the helmet we want to get the Royal Cowl and pick the third ability and second passive. Then for just armor, go with the Scholar's Robe and pick the third ability and first passive. Then for boots, go with the Soldier Boots and choose the second ability and second passive. Then for your cape, you pick the Morgana cape. And then lastly for your consumables, you want to go with the Healing Potions and Pork Omelet. Usually this would be the part where I would explain the best alternatives. So for example, like which skills you would want to change, depending on what type of content you are doing. But one of my most favorite thing about this build is that you don't have to change a single thing, no matter what you want to do. Our Frost build's main core gameplay loop is to keep using as many Q spells as possible, and that's why most of our build is made around having infinite amount of energy, which will increase our casting speed. So if you're looking for a powerful build that works 100% the same, no matter who or how many people you're fighting, then this is the one for you. Okay, so now let's go over to the gameplay, where I will show you the best way to play this build. So for the first Q spell, we have the Ice Shard, which will drop the shards on the ground and explode in 3-meter range. As I said, this is our main ability that we will want to spam 24/7. So then for the next one, we have the W skill, which is the Frost Nova. This ability is a very advanced teleport that will teleport us to any direction we are aiming our character. Then it will give us 0.2 second immunity to damage and stun and deal damage to the enemies if they were standing close to us before we teleported. This teleport might seem very simple, but if you use it right, we can utilize it in 3 different ways. So the first one is to stun and deal damage, then to escape or catch enemies, or even to use as a defensive skill, because we get that 0.2 second immunity. So if you are ever fighting in PvP, and let's say that for example we are fighting against a one-handed curse player, and then he puts the dead curse on us, and it's about to explode, then if we time the teleport correctly, then we will take 0 damage, which is very OP. Then of course for the E skill we have the Freezing Wind, and this skill will blow a freezing wind, which will stun and slow enemies for 4.4 seconds, and deal magic damage. But most importantly, this E skill will activate our cape, so we will get that 50% cast time boost for 8 seconds, which is very important for our spam Q build. Then our next ability is the Speedcaster, which will give us the same cast speed buff like the Morgana cape, but on top of the cast time reduction, all of our skills will cost 70% less energy for 8 seconds. And when we spam our Qs multiple times, this 70% reduction is a huge deal. Then our D skill is called the Perpetual Energy, which again is meant for Q spamming. So when we activate it, all of our skills will cost 0 energy for the next 15 seconds. And then lastly we have the F ability. This is just a simple run skill, which will increase our speed by 80% and give us health regen for 5 seconds. I personally really like the Soldier Boots, but for any build the shoes can be changed, so you can go with mine or whichever you like the most. And then of course we have the consumables. The healing potions will regain our HP after a few seconds, and as we basically have 0 defensive skills, so it's important to get some type of defense buff from the potions. And then lastly we will use the omelet because of the cooldown reduction and cast speed reduction. And then finally we have few cabbage soups in our inventory as well. This is an old school trick, but if you ever get in trouble, or if you are fighting in corrupted dungeons or open world and you're low health, then you can equip the soups and use them, and this will regain your health back to full in 3 to 4 seconds because of the 270% health regen buff. But don't forget that in Albion consumables don't stack, so if you don't want to lose your buff from the omelet, then only use soups very rarely. So with all of this said, now let's move over to the rotation, and PvE and PvP literally work the same. So then at the beginning of the fight you want to activate your D skill, then right away use your E ability, and then keep spamming the Q skill until you run out of the speed casting buff. So then when you feel like you slow down, which will happen after around 8 seconds, then again right away this time you want to activate your R skill, and then keep spamming your Q skill until you again run out of speed. And then finally from here, you can keep using your W and F skills for extra damage, or to run away or catch the enemies. Like I previously said, the W skill has many uses, and you can even teleport into the enemy to cancel his spell casting, or use healing potion while running away from the enemy, so then at any moment, when your buffs come up again, then you can burst the enemy down. So now let's see what we did in this rotation. But first, while activating the D skill, we will get a buff that for the next 15 seconds, all of our skills will cost 0 energy. So then we can use our E skill, which will give us a casting speed for 8 seconds because of the cape. So then we can spam our Qs for insane damage. Then when we slow down, this time we will activate the R skill, and this will again give us a cast speed, so then again we can spam our Qs and get huge damage. And as both cast speed buffs last for about 7 to 8 seconds, so if we time them right, then we can use both cast speeds in those 15 seconds and spend 0 energy whatsoever. And then from here, depending on the fight, we can run, catch or outplay the enemy with the rest of our skills. As the Frost player, we don't have a lot of defensives, because most of our skills are meant to support our Qs, so we could spam them and do big damage. So for PvE this works amazing, but then for PvP you have to be a bit more careful and just burst down the enemy before he has even a chance to attack you, or build up his stacks. As I said, I played this build and weapon for many years now, and it is still very fun and one of the best builds that works very well for every single content. So what are you waiting for? Try this build out and have fun! So then moving over to the quick build introduction, and for the weapon we are going to use the battle bracers. This build has insane amount of mobility skills that will give us bunch of crowd control buffs and very good damage if we use our skills in the correct order. And I will show you two similar setups, one for PvP and one for PvE. So no matter what type of activity you want to do, you will get the best performance out of your weapon. And then finally you can use the setup starting with tier 4 equipment and pretty low levels in the Destiny board. So no matter what type of player you are, veteran or new, this build is definitely for you. So then moving over to the build, and for the weapon we are going to go with the battle bracers. So for your Q you pick the second option, then for your W you pick the first option, and then lastly for your passive you go with the hard catch, which is the fourth option. Then for the helmet you want to get the mage cowl and pick the third ability and first passive. Then for chest armor go with the assassin's jacket and pick the third ability and first passive. Then for boots go with the cleric sandals and choose the second ability and second passive. Then for your cape you pick the undead cape. And then lastly for your consumables you want to go with the poison potions and dead water eels too. But then for alternatives, specifically for fame farming and any type of mob farming, if we want to go with the full damage build, then we want to switch our assassin's jacket with the stalker's jacket and pick the third ability and first passive. The best thing about the switch is that both are leather armor, so you can get the same stats and buffs, but only you will use invisibility for PvP and then the electric field for mob farming. And then lastly, again, if we want to orientate more on PvE, then we want to switch our undead cape with the Tether cape. This is another pure damage cape that is amazing for PvE. And as I said in other videos, the best builds in my opinion are versatile, so you can get 100% performance no matter in what type of event you are participating. So that's why having multiple options and alternatives is the way to go. Okay, so now let's go over to the gameplay, where I will show you the best way to play this build. So for the first Q spell we have the Dragon Leap, and this ability is a 2-in-1 skill. So we will dash towards the enemy and kick all enemies in 2.5 meter range. And if at least one of our kicks land on the enemy, then we will get our other half of the skill, which this time we will leap towards the enemy position, and we will do damage more than the first time. And plus all enemies will be thrown in the air for 0.5 seconds. So we will be able to interrupt enemy casting spells. Overall the skill is simple but great, and it will do damage in AoE, so we can use it for both PvE and PvP. Then for the next skill we have the W, which this ability will dash towards the enemy, repeatedly kicking and dealing damage even up to 3 times. If you land a kick on the enemy, then he will be pulled alongside with you, so especially if you are trying to catch a player or save your teammate, then this is a great utility skill. Then our E skill is called the Falcon Smash, which will make our character float in the air and become immune to any effect. And if we press the skill again while in the air, then we will dive towards the enemy and deal massive amounts of damage in 6 meter range, depending on how close the enemy was standing from our first up in the air position. So simply put, we want to attack our enemy with one of our Q or W skills to get as close to the enemy as possible, and then we use our E skill twice, so we would be right on the enemy and do a lot of damage. And as you can tell, this E skill is not only good for damage, but you can as well use it for defense. because in this case, if you get overwhelmed by a lot of enemies, you can absorb a lot of damage and negative spells by going up in the air. Then our R skill is called the Ambush, which is a simple invisibility spell that makes us invisible for few seconds. And when we come out of the invis, then we can do 40% more damage if we stayed invisible for at least 5 seconds. Then our next skill is the D spell, which is called the Fire Breath. This is a simple damage ability that will set the enemies on fire and deal magic damage over 3 seconds in AoE range. And then finally we have the F skill, which is a basic movement speed increase ability that will give us 80% speed boost and restore our energy for 5 seconds. And then of course we still have our cape and consumables. So we are using poison potions for extra throw damage. Then we are using the stew to increase our damage and cooldown reduction. And then of course we have the undead cape, which in PvP is amazing because if we get below 50% health, then we will become invisible. So if you never want to die or go down, then this is a great cape. But then if you don't care that much about versatility builds and PvP, but you only care about pure damage with no defensive skills, so a build that is mainly meant for farming monsters, then I would switch our cape to the Tetfur cape, and this will give us that every 15 seconds when we auto attack the enemy, we will do lightning damage passively. And then finally, if we switch our assassin's jacket for the stalker's jacket, so now we will get the electric field, which when we press the skill, will activate this massive field that will last for 7 seconds and do a lot of damage in AoE range. And then on top of all of this, we will even have our cabbage soup in the inventory to use if we ever get in trouble. So what you want to do is, if you ever get chased or even run away on low health, then if you keep running and get out of combat, then you can switch to the soup and use it, and in few seconds your health will regen to full because of the 270% health regeneration buff. So this is a simple trick that we can use. But you do need to keep in mind that the soup is like any other food consumable, so it will overrun our stew because they don't stack. So I would recommend to only use it very rarely. So with all of this said, now let's move over to the rotation. And PvE and PvP basically work the same way. So then at the beginning of the fight we want to use our Dragon Leap twice. Then if the enemy is very close to us, then we use our E skill twice again. Like I said previously, the first E press will push us in the air, and then the second E press will make us smash to the ground and do damage. And then finally we can use our W and D skill, which are basic but amazing damage skills. And then from here we can use poison potions if the enemy is still alive, and then use the R and F skill depending on the fight, as long as you understand that invisibility and run skill can be used both offensively and defensively. So now let's see what we did in this rotation. But first, while using the Q skill twice, we will dash towards the enemy twice and do damage. This skill of course will do a bunch of damage, but it's mainly meant to get close to the enemy. So then we can use our E skill twice, which will do even more damage. And as I said, we want the enemy as close as possible, so our E skill can do as much damage as possible. And then finally from here we can use our auto attacks, W and D skills, which will burn and kick the enemy for even more damage. One of the best things I love about this build is that yes, I gave you the best and most optimal skill rotation, but as there aren't any real stacks, so if you want to, you can use any of your skills in whatever order you want, as long as you always are close to the enemy to take the advantage of the close proximity damage buff and the movement buffs we get from our Q and W, then everything else is up to you. And that's about it.